For my final project, I chose the Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park. My reasoning behind this was to spatially analyze the Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park in relation to different nearby transportation paths. At first, I tried to do Walden Springs, just because I had a lot of research with it, but there was no relevant data that I could actually do with that. I tried to do hydrological data and radiological data, couldn't find it. So what I did, I went on to after I, of course, configured my base directory, I went on to try to find a zip file of structures in in Appomattox area. I chose the Appomattox because the fact that when I was younger, I went there as a kid, and essentially I was mesmerized by how just intact the place was. I mean, like, you have a courthouse that's like fully intact from the 1860s, just the way it was, even back then, whenever General Lee and Ulysses S. Grant signed the peace agreement. And so I prepared the data, and what happened was I chose a base directory and the structure file for Virginia State from the USGS. It went well, and then I went to importing modules and classes. When I imported this module and class, the ArcPy and env worked perfectly. So then I went towards specifying paths and directories and data. Here, I made the out geodatabase as final project geodatabase, but I had a little glitch where the geodatabase was doubled. That caused a little bit of problems, but we got past that. So then I try to make it join with base directory to do an out geodatabase. I got this from example 6, of course, as you see right there. I did not fully get that out of there, and essentially I was able to actually pull from this very well. And the paths they went together. To verify the directory, I essentially went through OS path exists, if not, and I made sure it printed my workspace. It turned out to be a valid reference in a valid directory. Now, the part that was a little bit difficult, pulling data from National Park API. So I connected to the National Park Service the same as example 6 in the GIS. Yeah. And so essentially, I got a API key from the National Park Service. I put that in. I got this header and token password. I got in, and here's where things got tricky. So the original Parks API key, I had to basically delete almost half of this in order for the base URL to actually show correctly. And with endpoints, I wanted to do activities and parks. And so by doing that, I was able to get a good data set in for activities. And so I was able to actually get a good library going. So I got the JSONs tool from example 6 or exercise 6, sorry. Exercise 6 on, from the National Weather Service thing we did, but of course I had to tweak it for this. And well, that's where I first learned to use it. So from JSONs, I went and tested headers, turned out to be true, and essentially I opened up a list of data sets. These data sets were quite tricky to actually deal with because of the fact that they were so much more different than the actual like example sixes. But this is where I got the idea of Appomattox from. If we go to, yeah, just it's in there somewhere. This and here's where I ran into a serious error that I was trying to deal with all night to try to iron out. And so the Appomattox Courthouse National Park, I went ahead and defined a variable containing the name of new feature class. Then I set the spatial reference to WGS 1984 due to the fact that this is just a good overall spatial reference, just due to the fact that it is a projected system and not a geographic system. Learn that stuff in cartography. Then I went through the ArcPy, create feature class management. I put the out path to env workspace, out name, Appomattox FC, geometry type point, and spatial reference SR. I created the dictionary containing the fields, data sets. I pulled data, so I pulled this area from the, I think it was example 2, where we learned how to do this. But I essentially, I replaced these sets. I forgot to fully delete this, but it got the job done. Iterating over the fields and data types in the field directory. I went ELE and field directory for the Appomattox to add fields to the Appomattox FC. And through that, I went through Appomattox FC, ELE, and then finally, I got to a catastrophic error. With this catastrophic error, I decided that I needed to focus on actually making a map that's actually legible and somewhat good to aesthetically pleasing, and also fills my objective in showing proximity to like buildings in proximity to the Appomattox transportation routes. So in order to show this, I labeled the Appomattox buildings in white to try to, like, stay in its own symbology. The red squares are symbolizing the buildings, and the white lettering is the buildings themselves. And so these yellowish symbols that actually have a label are the trails, and these trails have been here since the Civil War in general. Some of them, of course, were like the history trail, were added later, but still. Essentially, I put a 1 mile buffer around every single building to try to show in walking distance somewhere you can, like, possibly get to each, like, trail or railroad, for instance. But not even the furthest trailhead can actually reach the railroad for the 1 mile buffer. So in doing so, I decided to show through a physical map the proximity to of these historical buildings to transportation routes.